The photo sat in my lap like it weighed 1,000 pounds. 25 years of marriage, frozen in a smiling frame, me in a white dress, Mark in a navy suit, and my parents standing proudly behind us. I used to think that picture meant everything: love, support, family. But now, as I stared at it, all I could see was the lie. I traced the edges of the frame with my finger. The glass was cold. My breath caught in my chest as my eyes fixated on the faces of my parents. How could they smile like that, so warm, so genuine, while hiding what they were doing behind my back? It started with little things. Whispers after dinners. A strange look from my mother when Mark spoke. My father's tight-lipped smile when he toasted to our success. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. After all, they were my parents. They raised me. They'd never hurt me, right? But deep down, a knot had begun to form. And on that rainy Tuesday afternoon, when I sat alone in my car and found an email forwarded to a business contact from my father's personal account, warning them not to trust my husband, I felt that knot snap. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there. Silent. Numb. Realizing that the people who brought me into this world were slowly, deliberately trying to destroy the life I built with the man I chose. That's when the line was drawn. That's when I realized some betrayals don't come from enemies or strangers. They come from the ones who look at you across the dinner table and ask if you'd like more wine. And the worst part? I still don't know why they did it. But I'm going to find out. And when I do, they won't be able to pretend anymore. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The house I grew up in still smelled like pine wood polish and overcooked meatloaf. It hadn't changed in decades: same lace curtains, same floral couch, same stern energy pulsing through the walls. As a child, I thought it was the safest place in the world. As an adult, walking back into it felt like stepping onto a stage where everyone already knew their lines, except me. My mother greeted me with her usual tight-lipped smile, arms outstretched but her eyes scanning. "You look tired," she said instead of hello. My father barely glanced up from the financial section of the newspaper. "Long day?" I forced a smile. "You could say that." Mark hadn't come with me. He rarely did anymore. Not because he didn't want to, but because I had asked him not to. I told him it was easier that way. Fewer arguments. Less tension. What I really meant was, I didn't want to choose sides. Not yet. They never liked him. Not even in the beginning. I remember the first dinner after I brought him home. He'd worn the wrong kind of shoes, answered questions too directly, laughed a little too loud. My mother called him unrefined. My father said, "He seems ambitious. Let's hope it's not the reckless kind." But Mark had proved them wrong. He built his real estate business from the ground up. He worked 16-hour days, came home exhausted but never too tired to hold my hand or ask about my class lectures. He loved me like it was his job, no, his calling. And even then, it was never enough. "I saw you canceled the family brunch last Sunday," my mother said, now placing a cup of tea in front of me with surgical precision. "Mark had another meeting?" I nodded. "He's been under a lot of pressure lately. The merger's taking longer than expected." My father folded his paper, finally looking me in the eye. Maybe if he didn't gamble on such high-risk deals, he'd sleep better at night. There it was. The jab. The subtle punch wrapped in paternal concern. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. He's doing what he needs to do to keep his company alive. They exchanged a look, just a flicker, but I saw it. That smug confirmation that they knew better. That they'd been right all along. And for the first time, instead of shrinking into my daughter self, I felt something stir. Not anger. Not defiance. Just awakening. I finished my tea, placed the cup down gently, and stood. "Thanks for the hospitality," I said. "But I think I'll head home." My mother looked surprised. My father blinked. Neither said a word. I walked out into the cold evening air, and as the door closed behind me, I realized something chilling. This house was never a home. It was a courtroom. And my husband was never on trial alone. I just hadn't realized I'd been sitting on the prosecution's bench all along. The changes came quietly, like rust creeping onto steel. At first, I thought it was just stress. Mark had taken on a new development project that was bigger than anything he'd done before. He was coming home later, speaking less, staring longer at nothing in particular during dinner. I asked him once, gently, "Are you okay?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired. You know how it is." But I didn't. Not really. Because something else had changed, too. Our conversations used to flow like rivers, books we'd read, lectures I'd given, ideas he had for community housing. Now they felt like potholes I kept stepping into, never knowing which topic would make him shut down completely. Then came the whispers. Not from Mark, but from others. Harmless at first. A colleague at the university mentioned that she'd heard Mark's company had lost a big investor. A neighbor casually asked if we were okay, after everything going on with the business. Even my aunt from Seattle left a voicemail saying, "Let me know if there's anything you two need during this rough patch." I didn't understand where these stories were coming from. So I asked Mark directly one night as we folded laundry. "Is something happening with the business that I don't know about?" He looked startled. "Where did that come from?" "I've just heard some things. People are talking." His jaw clenched. "Well, people talk when they don't have the facts. There's nothing wrong that we can't fix." Then he turned away and muttered under his breath, almost too quiet to hear, "Not that it's any of their damn business anyway." I should have pressed him harder. But I didn't. Not then. Instead, I found myself paying closer attention. Watching his reactions. Noting his tone. Noticing how he'd flinch slightly when my phone rang if he recognized the caller as one of my family members. One day, he was pacing in the backyard, phone pressed to his ear. I wasn't eavesdropping, at least not intentionally, but the words reached me through the kitchen window. "They're sabotaging the deal," he said, his voice low and fierce. "I don't know how they're getting this info. But they're feeding my competitors lies. And I have a damn good idea who they is." My hands froze over the sink. I waited until he hung up and came inside. His face was red with frustration. I asked softly, "Who's sabotaging you?" He didn't answer right away. Just stared at me. Long enough that I started to feel small under his gaze. Then he said, "Forget it. You don't need to be dragged into this." But the truth was, I was already in it. I just didn't know how deep the roots went, or how familiar the hands were that had planted the seeds of doubt all around us. It all came crashing down one night during an argument that started, ironically, about something trivial. I can't even remember what triggered it. Maybe it was a forgotten grocery item. Maybe it was the silence between us that had grown too loud to ignore. Mark slammed the refrigerator door. "You never listen anymore," he said. "You're so wrapped up in defending your parents, you don't even see what they're doing." I turned to him, startled. "What is that supposed to mean?" He stared at me like I had just asked where the sun goes at night. "They're trying to ruin me, Sarah. And you're letting them." I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it sounded ridiculous. "Are you serious right now? My parents?" He didn't flinch. "Yes. Your father's been leaking information about my company. Your mother's been calling my clients I introduced to your family over dinner, and warning them not to trust me." I shook my head. "That's impossible. They would never." "Open your eyes," he shouted, then stopped himself, running a hand over his face. "God. I didn't want to tell you this way." I stood frozen, heart pounding. "How long have you known?" "Months." "Then why didn't you say anything?" He looked at me with something between exhaustion and sorrow. Because I knew you wouldn't believe me. And he was right. In that moment, I didn't. I grabbed my purse, stormed out, and drove aimlessly around town, ending up in front of my parents' house like muscle memory. But I didn't go in. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel, the words Mark had said playing over and over in my mind. It couldn't be true, could it? Later that night, after tossing in bed, I gave in. I opened my laptop and searched my mother's name alongside the name of one of Mark's clients. A blog post came up, anonymous source, but eerily specific. It described Mark's project in detail and warned about questionable financial practices. There was a quote from a concerned family member. My stomach dropped. The next day, I found my father's old email account still logged in on the family computer. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But I did. What I found was worse than anything I had imagined. Dozens of emails to Mark's investors, brokers, even old business partners, subtle warnings, hints that Mark was unstable, unreliable, a risk. And then there was Lisa. Her name popped up in an email subject line, payment for discreet research. Lisa had worked for Mark years ago. Quiet, polite, forgettable. But now she was back, with a price and a purpose. I tracked her down. She was hesitant at first. But eventually, guilt cracked her calm exterior. She confessed everything. Your parents paid me to find dirt on Mark, she whispered. They told me they just wanted to make sure you weren't being misled, that you were safe. Safe. I left her apartment in silence, her words echoing like a cruel lullaby. I sat in my car, hands trembling on the steering wheel, the truth now unshakable. They had done it. They had betrayed not just my husband, but me. And in that moment, I realized something even worse. I wasn't just collateral damage in their scheme. I was the weapon they'd tried to use. I couldn't breathe. Not in the dramatic, gasping for air way they show in movies, but in the real, suffocating stillness where your chest tightens and your body forgets how to feel safe. I sat in the driveway for what felt like hours, staring at the dashboard, blinking through tears I didn't remember letting fall. My parents. The people who'd taught me right from wrong. Who'd held me through scraped knees and broken hearts. Who'd cried at my wedding and toasted to our future. They had dismantled that future piece by piece. And I had stood there holding the hammer, too blind to realize it was in my hand. That night, I didn't speak much. Mark didn't press me. He just watched me carefully, the way someone watches a glass that might crack under its own weight. I told him what I'd found, about the emails, Lisa, the rumors. Every word was a blade, but I said them anyway. When I finished, he looked at me, not with anger, not even with triumph, but with something far more devastating, sadness. I knew, he said quietly. Not everything, but enough. I just hoped if I gave them time, they'd stop. That maybe, they'd come around. You should have told me. I didn't want to make you choose. But I had already been choosing, hadn't I? Every time I dismissed his silence, every time I made excuses for their behavior, every time I said, they mean well, I had chosen them over him. I'm sorry, I whispered. And it felt like a confession 25 years overdue. He reached for my hand. I never needed you to protect me, Sarah. I just needed you to believe in me. The next morning, I stood in front of my parents' house again. This time, I rang the bell. My mother opened the door with her usual poised grace, as if nothing had happened. Oh honey, we weren't expecting you. No, I said, voice steady. I imagine you weren't. My father sat in the living room, folding the same paper he always read, the one he quoted during every dinner argument. Can we talk? I asked. They nodded. What followed wasn't a screaming match. It wasn't dramatic or theatrical. It was heartbreakingly simple. I told them what I knew. The emails. The sabotage. The lies. My mother clutched her pearls as if I'd cursed. My father shifted in his chair but didn't deny it. We were trying to protect you, he said. From what? I asked. From happiness? No, from being controlled. From being small. From becoming someone else's shadow. I laughed bitterly. You mean from becoming someone who didn't need your permission anymore? My mother teared up. You don't understand how hard it is, watching your child drift further away. I interrupted. I didn't drift. You pushed. And for the first time, they said nothing. That silence was more honest than any apology they could have given. I stood up, heart pounding. I love you both, I said. But I won't let you make me choose between being your daughter and being Mark's wife. If you can't respect my marriage, I can't be part of this family the way I used to. My mother cried. My father looked down at his hands. I walked out feeling like my feet weighed 1,000 pounds, but also, like I was finally walking in the right direction. Away from their shadow. And toward my own light. The days that followed were heavier than I expected. You'd think that drawing a line, finally saying the words I should have said years ago, would bring relief. Liberation. But no one tells you how grief sneaks in through the back door even when you're the one who closed it. I cried in the shower. In the car. While folding laundry. Not because I regretted what I said, but because letting go of the illusion of perfect family is like mourning someone who's still alive. My phone lit up with missed calls. My mother left voice messages filled with half apologies wrapped in guilt. My father sent a long email that read more like a legal brief than an expression of remorse. But not once did they say the two words I needed most, we're sorry. Mark didn't say much about it. He cooked dinner more often. Held my hand when I sat silently for hours. Kissed the top of my head every night like a promise that he wasn't going anywhere. And still, I felt split. Like a bridge collapsing in the middle, unsure which side to fall toward. Until Linda called. My older sister. The ghost of family dinners passed. She hadn't been around in years. We always said it was because she lived out of state, or that she was just busy. But I saw the truth now. She had pulled away because she'd already lived this. I heard what happened, she said softly over the phone. I'm proud of you. Those words undid me. I told her everything, about the sabotage, the confrontation, the ache of it all. She listened without judgment, only quiet understanding. Then she said something that stuck. They raised us to think love was loyalty. But love is truth, Sarah. And the truth is, you've always been the brave one. You just didn't know it yet. After we hung up, I sat alone on the porch, watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hollow. The next morning, I started therapy. I needed help unpacking the weight of decades, of patterns, of people-pleasing, of always choosing peace over truth. And slowly, I began to feel whole again. Mark and I talked more, about everything, not just the past. We started cooking together again. Reading side by side like we used to. Laughing, even. The marriage I thought was slipping through my fingers was actually growing stronger, now rooted in something more honest than ever. We weren't pretending anymore. Not with each other. Not with anyone. And that, I realized, was the real gift of this pain. It forced me to stop shrinking myself to make other people comfortable. It taught me that boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges you build to protect what matters. And for the first time in my life, I was the architect of my own peace. 6 months passed. It's strange how quietly healing happens. There was no dramatic turning point, no sweeping music, no cinematic moment where everything suddenly made sense. Just small shifts. Brighter mornings. Deeper breaths. Fewer knots in my stomach when I opened my inbox or glanced at my phone. One afternoon, a letter arrived. Handwritten. From my mother. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it, unsure if I was ready for whatever was inside. It was short. Hesitant. But real. She wrote that she and my father had spent the past few months in counseling. That it was hard, uncomfortable, even painful, but that it opened their eyes to patterns they had never questioned before. She didn't justify what they did. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. But she said, "We were wrong. And we're sorry." For the first time, I believed her. We met at a quiet cafe. Neutral ground. Mark didn't come. Not because he was angry, but because he trusted me to handle it. That, in itself, was an act of love. My parents looked older. Softer. The sharpness I used to brace for had dulled, replaced by uncertainty. "I know we can't undo what we did," my father said. "But we don't want to lose you." They apologized to Mark in person a week later. It was awkward, stilted. No grand hugs or warm embraces. But the words were spoken. The door cracked open. And that was enough, for now. Weeks later, Mark and I renewed our vows in our backyard. It wasn't fancy. Just a few close friends. My sister Linda officiated. She teared up during the speech she wrote, saying, "You taught us that love without respect isn't love at all." My parents came. They didn't interrupt. They didn't dominate the space. They sat quietly in the back, watching, learning how to be part of our lives without trying to control them. After the ceremony, I stood beside Mark and looked around. The faces. The laughter. The peace. I had spent so much of my life believing that love meant sacrifice. That to keep the people you loved close, you had to bend, shrink, adapt. But now I knew the truth. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. Real love holds space for your full self, your voice, your choices, your boundaries. And as Mark pulled me into a slow dance under the string lights, I whispered to him, "Thank you for waiting for me, to become the woman I was always meant to be." He smiled. She was always there. She just had to take the mic. And I had. Finally. Loud and clear. 1 year later. I stood in the garden, barefoot in the early morning light, watching the roses bloom just beneath the kitchen window. Mark was inside, humming some old song from the 80s while making coffee, his version of a love language. The world was quiet, warm, whole. My phone buzzed. A photo memory popped up. A dinner from 2 years ago, me, Mark, my parents. Smiles forced, tension behind the eyes. At the time, I'd called it family. Now I knew better. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without breaking. We still saw my parents, but on our terms. No guilt. No power games. We met in public places. We kept the conversation light, respectful. We left if boundaries were crossed. And they, slowly, began to understand love could exist within limits. My therapy sessions had turned from survival to growth. From unlearning to rebuilding. I'd started teaching again, part-time, by choice. Literature, of course. There's something deeply poetic about teaching young minds how to find meaning in betrayal, loss, rebirth. I taught them that stories are mirrors, and sometimes escape hatches. Linda and I were closer than ever. We joked about writing a book called How to Say No to People Who Raised You. Half joke. Half coping. All truth. As for Mark and me, we were better, not because we were untouched by pain, but because we walked through the fire and didn't pretend it hadn't burned. We argued better now. Softer. Clearer. We laughed louder, too. More freely. That summer, we took a road trip up the coast. No destination. Just us. Windows down. Music blasting. My head on his shoulder at rest stops. We stopped at a small beach town where no one knew us, rented a tiny cottage, and danced barefoot in the kitchen with sand still on our legs. That night, as we watched the stars from a rickety porch swing, Mark turned to me and said, "I don't think I've ever loved you more than I do right now." I smiled. Not the polite kind. The kind that comes from deep peace. Me neither, I said. Because now, I love myself, too. That's what the past year had taught me. That survival is not the same as living. That loyalty without boundaries is just quiet self-destruction. That love, to be real, must be chosen again and again, even when it's hard. Especially then. And that sometimes, the most radical act of love is drawing a line, and then daring to build something beautiful on the other side. So if you're listening, and you're standing where I once stood, between guilt and growth, between loyalty and self-respect, let me say this. You are allowed to choose peace. You are allowed to choose you. And that's not betrayal. That's freedom. It was a sunny autumn afternoon when Mark and I hosted a quiet backyard lunch. Nothing fancy, just grilled vegetables, lemonade, and people who felt like safety. Linda came with her 2 kids, and my parents arrived, still tentative, still learning. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. The silence was no longer heavy. It was respectful. A shared understanding that we had all been broken in different ways, and now we were gently, slowly, stitching the pieces back together. After everyone left, Mark and I sat on the porch swing, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun dip below the trees. You think it'll last? I asked, not about the weather, but about everything. He didn't answer right away. He just looked at me with that quiet, steady gaze he always saved for the truth. It doesn't have to be perfect, he finally said. It just has to be real. And it was. We had earned this peace. Not by avoiding conflict, but by facing it. Not by pretending everything was okay, but by breaking the silence, setting the boundary, and holding space for healing. So if you've ever found yourself torn between the people who raised you and the person you're becoming. If you've ever been told that saying no to family is betrayal. If you've ever been gaslit, guilt-tripped, or manipulated into silence. This story is for you. Not because it has all the answers. But because it proves one simple, powerful truth. You can choose yourself, without losing your compassion. You can draw a line, and still hold love in your heart. And sometimes, that line? That's where your life finally begins.